our mission is to be a resource to everyone in this area, right? Like we don't want to stomp on any efforts going on at any other clubs or any resources that are being provided. Our message is always like, stay with your club, use us as a resource, right? We're going to have a lot of clinics, a lot of like practice opportunities. You can drop in anytime, but we want to see everyone rise together. Got that dog in me, yeah. Turn me up. Big energy, got the crowd going.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Wrestle podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Brenton, and today we are joined by special guest, Miss Lori Ayres. So how are you doing today, Lori?
I'm doing so great. Thank you so much, Jessica, for having me on today.
Yeah, I'm glad you could join me. So why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, where do I start? I am I've moved recently. So I grew up in New Jersey, and about, a year ago now, 12 months ago this month, I moved to California. And so now I am working as the executive director of the California Olympic Regional Training Center, and really excited to be part of the organization here and sort of building opportunities for wrestling on the West Coast for both men and women. I also, as part of that job, work as the director of the Cardinal Wrestling Club. So it's a youth wrestling program here in the Bay Area in California. And this tribe of people that we have working to build wrestling has been, it's been an awesome year being a part of it. So excited about that. Before coming to California, I had lived for 47 years in New Jersey. And so New Jersey is a huge wrestling state. I worked for over 20 years in public education. And on the side was a volunteer and leader in wrestling, predominantly women's wrestling for the most part for the past 7 to 10 years or so. And so yeah, co-founded Division I women's wrestling, super passionate about creating opportunities there. I'm sure we'll get into talking about that a little bit. And just my area of expertise, Jessica, is see a need, fill a need kind of gal. So that's really what I do in wrestling. That's how I got involved. So
awesome. I love that. So when did you get involved in wrestling? What kind of sparked that?
So it's always been really important to my family, wrestling. Back from when I was little, I got pulled in truly because I love to go to the concession stand at tournaments and things like that. And so it's all started from there. I had cousins that wrestled, and it was a sport that was important to my family and sort of put it on a pedestal, but not something that I was ever involved with as an athlete myself. And I regret that. I wasn't strong enough to sort of break those stereotypes. But I started dating my husband in high school, and he was a wrestler, and then followed his career through college. And he became an assistant coach at Lehigh and then a head coach at Princeton for 17 years. And so really got involved. I've always been involved, but got involved more pointedly, I would say, when my son started wrestling. And so started helping out with the club and using some skill sets. And really it took someone in an explicit way, kind of reaching out to say, hey, we'd like to have you involved here. And what would you, how could we utilize you? And before I started to really sort of dive in. And so I always say to everybody, look around, the people on the margins who keep showing up and make them, feel included. So specifically ask them, right, to be part of the organization, because sometimes you need to be specifically asked, especially when you don't necessarily feel included.
Right.
So organically. Yeah.
Okay. So then you got involved in the regional training center. Explain how that kind of process was happening for you.
Yeah. So regional, many people don't necessarily understand regional training centers. So maybe I'll back up for a second.
Okay.
So an Olympic Regional Training Center for wrestling is an offshoot of the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. And so as a way to spread out resources for athletes, because not every athlete, right, who's training to become an Olympian can live in Colorado Springs and train with the coaches there. Great opportunities, but it's not always something that is feasible. And so USA Wrestling had designed the offshoots to better serve our athletes and prepare them for hopefully one day making a podium, or certainly attending some of the competitions that would send them on that path.
Okay.
And so in order to do that, We have really, I would say, partnered, and for the most part, there's RTCs that aren't part of colleges or universities, but for the most part, they are. And so I became used to the RTC model when we were at Princeton. So the NJ, New Jersey RTC, is a organization that helps athletes out on the East Coast with the resources. And so I had served on the board of directors and sort of like learned the ins and outs. There's a lot that goes into organizing and running and managing and fundraising for a regional training center. And so, in order for it to be successful, and so learned a bit from in that capacity. When I was on the East Coast, we also utilized the RTC model to help grow regional wrestling for women. And so we would offer through the RTC opportunities for women to get together to wrestle because that can be a real big issue when we have more experienced athletes that maybe don't have the opportunity to get their hands on like a more experienced partner. So we tried
Right.
hard to bring women together at RTC practices at Columbia, at Princeton, at Harvard, et cetera. And so, yeah, so I got interested in the RTC model and originally like interested in it to the degree of like, how could we use this model to help women and also extend visibility and opportunities at these D1 institutions that didn't have women's wrestling.
Yeah.
So it was a way to build community at these schools and then also put women's wrestling like under the nose of decision makers and bring in women who could potentially be part of exhibition matches and sort of showcase that women are also in the sport and desire those higher level academic education opportunities combined with the wrestling opportunity.
Okay, I
And
love that.
so, yeah, right. Because we honestly don't. Like, if you look at our list of top 25, top 50 schools across the country that offer STEM programming, we don't have that marriage, right, of women's wrestling and those opportunities. We certainly have amazing colleges now. We have 106 NCAA women's wrestling opportunities, but we only have five of those 106 programs that are Division One opportunities, and only out of those five is one from a Power Four conference. And so, um, couple that with the fact that we don't have any that are, at top 25 institutions, top 50 institutions where they do offer these STEM programs for engineering, for science, for research, economics. And so we want to see all opportunities for women that wrestle. So are there great opportunities? Yes, there are. But do we want to keep pushing and make sure that we have every single academic and female wrestling opportunity out there? Yes, we do. And so it is important that we keep pushing. So I'm part of that. Your original question of like, how did I become part of the RTC here? So when we moved to California, my husband accepted the position to be the head coach at Stanford. That's why the Stanford shirt. We like literally moved as far as you can across the country to the Bay Area. And I was ready to pivot out of teaching after 20 plus years. And so I really did want to move into some kind of leadership role in wrestling. And so this was something that seemed like a good fit for me. And I'm trying to be creative in the way that we're building out our RTC. I didn't want to be like an RTC is also a 501c3. And so it's a nonprofit organization. And so when we built out our mission here at the California Regional Training Center, I wasn't going to be part of leading something that wasn't a true nonprofit. And so while we certainly have the mission of trying to get athletes on an Olympic podium, we also have the mission of building the community in wrestling, to expanding opportunities to marginalized individuals who might not have access to the sport. And so we do a lot of different activities and we have a lot of initiatives that make us a true nonprofit in the area. So, yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So what kind of things does the regional training center, like what kind of things do you do for the regional training center?
So one of the biggest things, like, I mean, really, I think we can all agree, right, that we can use wrestling as a vehicle. And so I literally love exposing families who might not have even considered wrestling for their children to the sport. And so we do a lot of outreach. Like even today, we're going into Coach Ayres and I are heading into one of the middle school duels, and he's going to run the middle school kids through a warm up prior to the two middle school programs competing. And he's going to
Okay.
talk about his experiences and sort of give some insight into why wrestling helped him. And yeah, and so it's kind of shocking, right, to go into some of these communities and have parents like who are in wrestling for the first time and loving it and wanting to hear more about like other outside opportunities outside of like the scholastic, but not knowing sort of where to go. And so we have a lot of interest. In the year that we've been here, our numbers in our wrestling club have like skyrocketed. And yeah, and really it's just about building like a community where there's give and take, right? We do want to fill our home wrestling matches, our Stanford varsity wrestling matches with attendees.
Right.
We want to see, we only have, I think it's 4 D1 programs, men's programs in California, which is an outrage. We had, so many more that were, in the 90s and the early 2000s that were dropped. And so we want to show that we are a revenue driving sport, and at Stanford wrestling is, and that, there's going to be fans that are filling the stadiums every time we have a home match and all those sort of things. We also have programming that is girls only in our club. And so in our RTC, so the RTC is like the umbrella and the club is under that in terms of like where it sits in the 501c3 structure.
Okay.
And so it's like an entity under the RTC. So I refer to them like interchangeably. But so our programming with our Cardinal Wrestling Club, one of the things that we did when we came here, Jessica, was like learn, right? We were curious, like let's go on a learning tour and see what is needed. And so as we went around, one of the things that kept coming up was like we really have girls that want to try wrestling, but they feel intimidated with like the male gaze and they really just want to be in an all-female space.
Yes.
And so, right, I heard that over and over again. So I literally was like, okay, well, let's do it. So last April, we did a trial. I was like, okay, we'll try it from April to July, and we'll do all girls' nights on Mondays, and we'll have it be by the women for the women. So only female coaches, only female athletes,
I
and
love
it has
that.
been it's been awesome. So and true to our mission, we wanted to make sure that we were being inclusive and hearing what our constituents wanted, and then responding to that, and we did, and it's been awesome. And it's really been a training facility also for the female coaches. We have about 5 to 6 female coaches that cycle through, and they're so funny because like there's a couple of them that like have wrestled since they were little, like wrestled through college, and then when I approached them to be like, hey, can you help coach some of these female practices, they were like, oh, I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified to do that. I'm like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about?
What do you
Like,
mean?
yes, you are. And so, a lot of them were nervous the first couple times they led practice because they've never been given those kinds of opportunities where it's been like full range, like you get to do it, like plan it out, let's talk about it. And to see them come in and be where they are now, like showing up and like commanding those rooms, right? Like, and having the little girls consistently show up, they can't wait to come in, right? They're excited, they're jazzed. They're like, I had a little girl last night. We have our practice on Monday who came in and like it was her first time competing at a tournament. She like brought her medal in and she was like showing everyone. So
I love that.
it's really cool. So we do those types of things. I mean, I could go on. We really we want to be a facility where we're not only training athletes but training coaches as well. And so we do have coaches cycle in to learn from the more experienced coaches. So that's always an option for high school coaches in the area. So yeah, we try to see the needs and fill the needs. We started we're piloting a Bay Area youth wrestling league through our club this year, which is trying to bridge new wrestlers and have them have a good first competition experience. So we do have an awesome association through USA Wrestling in our area. California's a little weird. We have not weird, but it's so big of a state that our USA Wrestling association is broken down into 18 little
Oh,
associations.
wow.
I know. And so in the Bay Area, the Santa Clara Valley Wrestling Association does an absolutely excellent job of hosting tournaments. But the little guys don't seem to be going, right? It's still intimidating to know, like, when you arrive at those tournaments, like, what mat do I get to? Like, where's weigh-ins? How do
Hmm.
I manage, and sort of like feel comfortable in that space? And so we saw that need, and we were like, you know what, we need to start to develop some kind of rec league, like rec leagues like they have on the East Coast. They really didn't have here in the Bay Area. And so we're organizing that this year so athletes can come in and have that good first competition experience and sort of bridge them to those USA Wrestling events.
That's awesome. I just want to go
Yeah.
back and touch a little bit on the all girl practices. Were numbers super increased after you did that?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure.
How
Yeah.
how
We
much
we
did it increase, do you think?
So that's a great question. One of our goals, and I can answer that specifically because we have an annual operating plan with critical success factors for RTC. And so one of our goals is to be between 40 and 50% um, per membership for women. So we want to see out of all of our membership for the club, we want it to be at least between 40 and 50% female. And so for our first quarter, we were able to get it up to 38%.
That's
So
awesome.
38% of our members are, and we have over, typically, between 100 and 115 members. So that's a nice chunk of people coming in, not to mention the drop-ins and things that we have, coming into the club. Because really at Stanford, at our Cardinal Wrestling Club that we run at Stanford, I should say, our mission is to be a resource to everyone in this area, right? Like we don't want to stomp on any efforts going on at any other clubs or any resources that are being provided. Our message is always like, stay with your club, use us as a resource, right? We're going to have a lot of clinics, a lot of like practice opportunities. You can drop in anytime, but we want to see everyone rise together, right? So we're not competing with any clubs. We're trying to collaborate and make relationships. So we're all helping each other. We understand that we probably have more resources, right, than some of the local clubs. We want to be a help to you. So,
Yeah, that's great. And
mhm.
obviously, that's a good structure and model to show everybody else that, if you create an all girls environment, more girls will come out for it. It does make a difference to make them feel comfortable, to make them, maybe they have a crush on Johnny in the corner over there and he's watching her wrestle. She's not going to wrestle like she would without him there, right? So I love that you are living proof that, making a girls' environment is what's going to increase numbers for girls wrestling. So that's just something that's very important. For me, for my state, I'm trying to push, separating the girls and boys in their practice rooms just because, I do want numbers to increase. So I love that you guys do that. And I love also that you guys create a space for women coaches to come in and learn how to coach. Like that's also amazing that you guys do that because there's a lack in women coaches, especially in wrestling, across the nation. And I think it's, hard for a girl to come in and not know, exactly how to coach, but has wrestled her whole life. You have the tools. And I love that you guys provide that opportunity for them. And then you are just a tool and you're not trying to take from, other places and other clubs. You're trying to help them and be a teacher for them. So I love that you guys do that. If there was athletes that are trying to, utilize RTCs, how would they be able to join those club practices and join those teaching opportunities?
That's another great question. Okay, so in order to officially come to RTC practices, let me go back for a second. So every RTC, sometimes I give information and people are like, oh, I contacted this RTC and they said that they don't have anything going on right now or they don't accept outside applicants. So every RTC has the agency to service the athletes they choose to service, right? So it's not like if you qualify, I'm going to talk for a second about the criteria to qualify to train at an RTC. If you qualify, you don't automatically have the ability to go into any RTC and go to those practices. You also have to, contact the RTC, fill out their application, go through some processes of communicating with the leadership there. So I wanted to kind of say that first so
Okay.
people get confused. In order to potentially like practice at an RTC regional training center, there are qualification procedures that you have to meet. So for a high school athlete, the easiest way to do that is to place top 6 at your state freestyle or Greco state championship. So you have to go to that freestyle and Greco state championship that's offered by your state, and you have to place top 6. So if you go to that state championship and maybe you place 7 or 8 and you're like, oh, I'm so close, then you can try to go to a regional event, a regional freestyle or Greco event, not folk style. It has to be Olympic style. And then place top 4 at one of the regional events. So if you don't place in your state, which is tough to place in California because it's so big. So this is a conversation I have a lot. It's like you still have the opportunity to go to a region and place top four.
Okay. That's good to
And then
know.
if you, yeah, and then if you do that, you can go to our website, californiartc.org, and you can fill out our application. The other caveat is that if you are a potential student athlete, so high school students, right, you have to live within a 250-mile radius of of the campus where we have our practices in order to qualify. And so, we're still evolving and we're still kind of thinking in real time. Last year, I had over 100 high school athletes that filled out our application, that qualified and filled out our application. And so in California, it's probably going to be way bigger than most places.
Right.
And so we did offer developmental RTC practices. Last year, we ran April through the end of September. And then they were able to come if the coaches saw something in them that they thought they could handle the full-on RTC practices with our like Olympic level like hopefuls. They would kind of suck them through the orb and pull them into those practices. So it was like a kind of an ease into it. The other important thing to note is that for all RTCs, high school athletes cannot attend during the folk style season. So
Okay.
like once your folk style season starts, you can't attend practices until the postseason for your state ends, like all the way to states.
Okay. So is it just high school athletes or do you do youth?
So you have to be U16 or up. So
Okay.
because you have to qualify, like so the easy, the first way to qualify is to place at that U16 or junior level at your state championship.
Okay. If you're older than high school, can you attend
Oh
practices
yeah.
or how do you qualify for that if you're older than high school?
So all the qualification procedures for art, these are great questions. For RTC criteria is on USA Wrestling's website. So if you go to USA Wrestling's website, we can even maybe put it, I can send you the link in the show notes if you do show notes.
Okay.
And you can like read about all the criteria. The criteria gets like that I'm giving you the easiest high school criteria. It gets more substantial as you go up. So like placing at the US Open, like placing at Fargo, like placing at the trial. So all those things like would qualify you to attend those kinds of practices. Essentially, we're trying to provide opportunities for the individuals, athletes that are doing well and performing well to have these additional resources to practice and these partners to practice with, right?
Right. So if there was, I know every state is different with the RTCs. If, say my state wasn't well established with the RTC, how would it become well established? What would have to happen for that?
So it really depends on, like I said before, a lot of colleges and universities host regional training centers, but it can also just be a USA Wrestling Club that decides to become a 501c3. So the RTC has to go through the process of becoming a 501c3. And so that can be a little bit of, a little arduous in terms of paperwork and processes. So you have to get that established first. And then every athlete, of course, who's part of the RTC has to have a USA Wrestling membership. And then you have to have some leadership and some coaching. And so it takes some organizing and some fundraising to get up and going. I think that's why the communities of the colleges and universities supporting it makes a lot of sense, right? But there are some clubs that have done it in the past. And so if you live in a more rural state, you could certainly like sort of rally the troops and say, hey, we want to create this in our area. And I think the RTC, what I've seen, especially for women and women's wrestling, is the RTC can sort of be this neutral ground, right? So there is like can be a little contentious between clubs. So unfortunately, what I've heard with women is like, like I fly across the country to wrestle this woman who lives 20 minutes away from me. It's so silly. And so if we can sort of get over our own egos, and that's really what happened on the East Coast, we would say like, hey, like, it doesn't matter what club you're a part of. We're having these women's RTC practices at Princeton, at Columbia, at Harvard, at Drexel, at UPenn. And so don't miss out. Like we're having these amazing clinicians come in. You're going to be able to get your hands on for free, by the way, other women in the area who you'd have to pay, almost $1,000 for entry fees and flights to get to Texas or whatever to wrestle.
Right.
You can do that like, every Saturday here in the fall. We ran fall and spring sequence of practices. And so you'd have to travel. So it was like, you'd have to get in the car in the morning early in the freezing cold in the fall and kind of travel. But it was so worth it once you got there because we would have like a full day. We actually, the way that it would work is we would do informal matches. So we'd put women in like groups of, whatever like pod made sense for who showed up. And then we do informal matches. The coaches would walk around and watch the informal matches and then teach technique based on what they saw. So it was really applicable to their wrestling. It really was helpful. So we got a lot of great feedback. And so now we've actually started to do that here on the West Coast. We had our first women's practice RTC day, last month, and it was great. So it's just like throwing spaghetti on the wall, Jessica, seeing what works, and then continuing to try to do it. I can't even remember what your last question was. Sorry, I'm like rambling.
No, it's okay. You answered it. So a lot of stuff going on at the RTC, a lot of ways to get involved, as an athlete and a coach as well. It's great things that the RTCs are doing. Moving on to the getting girls into D1. How was that process? How did you get that to happen?
So listen, it's still a process. I'm not sure it's happened fully. We, back in like 2018 or so, right? We had started to say like, there was a group of us that were on the East Coast and thinking, my goodness, myself included, because my daughter was getting ready to, have this college experience. And I wanted her to be able to go to a top university of her choice and also wrestle. And so it became painfully clear to me that there weren't all of the options that I wish existed for her. And so we actually wrote a proposal for a school that was on the East Coast, and we submitted it for a varsity program. This was even before the emerging sports process started for women's wrestling. Anyway, long story short, they were like, "Are you crazy? It's not even an emerging sport." We're like, "No." And I remember being like devastated because we had put so much time into it, and I was just like, oh my goodness. Like I was like crying. I like took to my bed. I was like, oh, I was so upset. And, because it was a total failure. And then it sort of like dawned on me. It's like, okay, like they're saying it's not time yet, but like what can be done, right? And we started talking to people and they're like, look, like you got to establish some kind of opportunity on campus through the club system. And originally I was like, what clubs? No, like I want it to be varsity. And I want it to be like a real opportunity, which little did I know it is a real opportunity, right? And these women are having amazing experiences. And so the model, Jessica, is basically to, even though we have these amazing stats right now for women's wrestling, it's like 65,000 women wrestling across the country at the high school level, the fastest growing sport in the country. Our USA Wrestling female membership is like skyrocketing. The trajectory is up, up, up. Anywhere you look to, the stats are awesome. But that's not going to be compelling enough alone to a decision maker at a D1 institution. Mm-hmm. There has to be other factors met. Of course, the financial factor, but we really have to put these women like under their noses so that they can meet them and see them and hear their stories and have it be constituents like students on campus that want it.
Yeah.
And so we have our first like proof of concepts happening with this model. And so we have 26 D1 women's clubs right now, because remember, there's a discrepancy. Like we have 106 NCAA programs, but only 5 of those programs are varsity D1 programs. Mm-hmm. So like we really have some work to do, because hypothetically or theoretically, mid-January is the vote to say like we're going to be we're officially now adding women's wrestling as a championship NCAA sport. And you're like smiling as I say that because it's exciting, right?
That is so exciting.
So that's coming in January. But the bad news is that we have mostly programs that are D2 and D3. And like these D3 programs, I doubt they're going to want to compete against the University of Iowa for any longer than they absolutely have to. Because in the beginning, we're going to have a combined championship.
Right.
We're going to have a combined championship in the beginning. But if I was a D3 decision maker, I'd be like, show me what we need to do to get sectioned off, because we have, so many programs, we can have our own championship. So that's going to start happening really quickly.
Right.
And D2 isn't far behind D3 with their ability to probably do that pretty quickly. And then where does that leave us with D1?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
are the decision makers going to say yes to support a championship at the cost that championships are with five programs? Maybe not.
Yeah.
And so it's, when I talk to people and say, like, I don't want to be alarmist, leaders in the community are like, no, no, no. It's alarming. Like the sky is falling a bit. We have to wrap our arms around this initiative to get more D1 programs. And so do I think once we have that, yes, we have like voted, it is officially a championship sport, women's wrestling, NCAA level. Do I think that more um, D1 schools are going to stand up at attention, decision makers are going to like consider it on a higher level? Yes, I do.
Okay.
But we need to continue like the work that we're doing and not just like say like, okay, it'll happen. It'll happen when it happens. No, 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 no. Like I hate, like if there's one thing I would love to change in women's wrestling, it's like if I hear someone say like, it's just not time yet. It's just not time yet. I like cringe because it's like if we go back, right? If we go back to 1972 when they passed Title IX, if we had a different attitude then with wrestling, we probably wouldn't have lost as many programs as we did in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like when are we all going to get it, right? Like it's like we have to build like opportunities for women's wrestling to have this like sister brother sport thing happening that was going to make us more powerful.
Right.
So if I was a D1 leader and on the men's side, I would be pushing for this. And I hear the narrative sometimes with D1 leaders and they'll, bless their hearts, but they'll say things like, like I love women's wrestling, but with the House settlement going on right now with the NCAA, with COVID, with any number of different things, it's like, it's just not time to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you better start having these conversations because if you love your sport on the men's side, you have to start diving into building D1 women's programs. You have to start making D1 programs safer on the men's side by really pouring into building women's programs. So I don't like when people have that narrative. It's like really not healthy for the sport. We have to stop. We kind of have seen over and over again that if we had sister sports for or a sister sport at a school, we might not have been on the chopping block. If we had
Right.
women's wrestling and men's wrestling, it might not have been cut.
Yeah.
So
Because
yeah,
it's
there's
growing it.
something we can do.
It's growing it for both women and men. Like adding the other half of the population in is just going to grow the sport. Like it's building for both genders, So it's interesting to hear those comments from people that it's not time yet. It's not time yet. It's like, okay, well, when is it going to be time? Because if we don't keep having these conversations, then it's never going to be time. Because there's going to be
No.
closed-minded men out there that are like, nope, this is a man's sport. It's like, no, it's not. This is a women's sport too. So
Well, and I think even beyond that, like there's always something we can do, right? Like it's not like, what really upset me back in 2018 when we got denied from that proposal was like, for a minute, I was like, oh, there's nothing we can do. Like, what are we supposed to do? And so, but there was something. The message of like the clubs and the establishment of the clubs is that there is always something that you can do to build momentum. Because people will constantly ask me, like, when are they getting a women's program at Stanford? When are they getting a women's program at Princeton? And my answer is always, it's a no till it's a yes. Like, we don't know what variable is going to be the tipping point for these decision makers. We have no idea.
mhm.
And so I know that in order to build the best case and have decision makers have that best opportunity to push an easy button is to build a robust club and put it right under their noses and have it be something that the students on campus are like knocking on their door about. Because I've seen it work now. I'm
Yeah.
seeing like the schools that are close to having those those clubs switch over to varsity, like it has worked. It has been something that has gained their attention. And so coupled with the amazing statistics, the championship status that hopefully, theoretically is going to be happening in January, and the robust club, like we are, all of those three things put together is making for a really compelling proposal.
Okay, so you're saying that they need to build those clubs to put it, right under the noses of those people that are making those decisions. How would you build those clubs? Through those RTCs, or do you need an RTC to build those clubs, or how would you do that?
That's another great question. So so the clubs that we're building, so the 26 plus Division I clubs that we have now across the country, are all affiliated with their universities, right? So like it's through the sports and recs department or through like the student groups or student activities department, they are associated with that school. And
Okay.
so we essentially at Division 1 Women's Wrestling, which is a grassroots group, it's myself and a couple other amazing rock star women that volunteer, right? Like we just want to see good things happen and we want to see the opportunities occur. And so we help women establish the clubs. And so we'll work with them and to like kind of look at their sports and recs application process for new sports clubs. And so you'd think it would be pretty straightforward, but it can be kind of complicated in terms of developing a constitution and filling out the application. A lot of times they're asking for these student clubs to have specific bylaws. They have rules around fundraising. They expect that the establishment of officers to run the organization and be on the board and attend meetings and align themselves with the policies and procedures that the university has in place. And so it can be a lot for an 18 to 22-year-old student who's on their own for the first time trying to navigate college and classes. And so what we found was there was a need to have sort of like case managers that are helping them and assisting and answering questions and trying to just sort of, when they come to a barrier, help them get over it. And so that's what we do essentially. And so now we've gotten to the point where we have quite a few clubs. Like last night, actually, we have a monthly meeting with our club leaders and coaches. And so last night we got on the call. And so we'll go over anything from like retention of athletes to fundraising, any number of different recruiting, number of different topics that come up. The women share with each other, and then some of the leadership shares. And so we have general check-ins so everyone knows like what the sort of status is at each club. And yeah, so we basically are essentially a grassroots group of women, which is historically the way we've gotten things accomplished in women's sports. And we just try to work to help each other and learn from each other. And now we have had some meetings with USA Wrestling about trying to have them partner with us to take these clubs now to the next level.
Okay.
Because there's also a need, right? Like, as much as I was like resistant to clubs in the beginning, there is really a need for women to have these club options, right? Like I was totally wrong. I was sitting on Zoom meetings when we started this, and I was like, there is no way that someone's going to enter college and want to try wrestling for the first time. Like that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I was so wrong. Like there are women who have never tried the sport who come onto these campuses and are like, you know what? I'm going to try wrestling. Yeah, this would be great.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, and listen, at every club, we have all kinds of experience levels. We have some women who are like wanting to shoot for the Olympics who are part of these clubs, and some women who are literally stepping onto the mat for the first time. And that's a whole nother like, balance issue.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we want to establish, hopefully with the help of USA Wrestling, a system and a structure that would support these clubs and develop, even like I said, like we have some new women, like can we develop novice competitions across the country in different regions so that we can support these women coming out to be part of this movement, because it is super important. And there's obviously clubs that could establish a D2 and D3 and NAIA schools, as well as like community colleges that could be part of a collaboration with USA Wrestling. We would love to eventually see a championship for clubs through USA Wrestling as freestyle. There is a club system right now, and they offer mainly folk style opportunities, which I'm certainly not taking away from those women who are part of those organizations or those clubs. That's great that there's an opportunity for them to continue to wrestle. But we do want to develop, freestyle opportunities because women wrestle freestyle in college.
Right. Well, that's awesome that, they can go to those and, like you mentioned, some of them are going to be novice wrestlers. Some of them are going to be shooting for the Olympics. Well, that's any age group that you find with wrestlers. And you just got to figure out how to, train both of them and how we can manage everybody in a practice. So, I mean, no matter what age you start at, you're starting and you're at a starting point. Everybody has a starting point. So no matter what age you're at a starting point. You're going to learn, you're going to grow, and you're going to develop regardless of what age you are. So I love that there's, those opportunities even in college to start wrestling. So that's awesome to hear that you guys are doing that. So is there anything else that you would like to add or say about the D1 programs growing and continuing to grow throughout our nation?
Honestly, I'm just grateful to people who are stepping up to help, right? So like I said, there's 26 across the country. And so chances are there's women who are working to start opportunities at a university near you. And so look into it and be supportive. We are trying to pair mentors with some of the club leaders across the country. So, you can reach out to me at ayreslori@gmail.com if you're interested in being a mentor and supporting some of these women, and just grateful for the people that are stepping up to be part of it. And, of course, we're fundraising, so donations help too to support some of the activities and competitions and apparel purchases and things that are going on. So that's always appreciated.
Okay, awesome. So you have a closing quote for us. Would you like to go ahead and say that for me, please?
So we have a family quote that we sort of live by, and it was given to us by my husband and I both started in education. And so the director at the school that we worked at always said, gentle pressure relentlessly applied. And so it's really something that him and I try to get up every day and think about, because nothing really, if I think back across my life and I'm like, what are the things that I'm proud of that I accomplished? Nothing came quickly.
Right.
Nothing that I'm super proud of came quickly. So I try to remind myself, like, gentle pressure. That's my personality, right? I'm not going to come in and be necessarily a glass breaker. It's just not who I am. And so I try to just sort of like take deep breaths, listen, be curious, and so apply that gentle pressure relentlessly, Jessica. And it's been working. So yeah, that's what I would say. Gentle pressure relentlessly applied.
That's a great quote. I love that. Is there anybody on here that you'd like to thank or give a shout out to?
I love that. I would love to give a shout out to the women's group and the community that we're building here in the Bay Area. So, I mean, I don't want to like miss anyone's names, but they know who they are. Like we have a group of leaders and coaches and just like women who are working super hard right here in the Bay Area in California. And I just want to applaud them. And I really am thankful to them, because it's challenging to move across the country, and they've been super supportive. And it's nice that really, and I'm sure you get this, Jessica, you can show up somewhere and there can be women in the room who are part of the wrestling community and they feel like immediate friends. That's what happened when I moved here. So I'm super grateful to all the women, and they know who they are, who are in this area, who have been so kind and supportive of me being here. So,
well, great. I'm sure they're appreciative of you being there a lot, and I'm sure everybody is moving in a better step forward over there with the RTC program, and you sort of leading that way and applying that gentle pressure to them. So I appreciate you coming on my podcast today. I look forward to more D1 schools getting involved. And I love that you're kind of leading the way for women and for D1 and kind of giving us a path to follow along that way. So I'm just excited to see everything in the future. And I'm glad that you could come on today to share with us.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yes. And thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Accept the loss, I'm hard-headed. There's a little bit of madness to my method. Many falling off that fine line that I'm treading. I risk anything to be great, and I'm not letting nobody rob me of my victory. Number one, that's what I'm meant to be. When by any means, only thing that makes sense to me, I can make nice or make history.